at your age. So in this live we will talk and we will read these short stories in English just to practice English and to master it. Okay, let's start with the first story. Its title is At Your Age by Scott Fitzgerald. Okay, let's start with chapter 1. Tom Squares came into the drug store to buy a toothbrush, a can of talcum, a gargle, Castile soap, Epsom salts, and a box of cigars. Having lived alone for many years, he was methodical, and while waiting to be served, he held the list in his hand. It was Christmas week. With his cane, Tom knocked two clean cloths off it from his overshoes. Then, looking up, he saw the blonde girl. She was a rare blonde, even in that promised of land of Scandinavians, where pretty blondes are not rare. There was warm color in her cheeks, lips, and pink little hands that folded powders into papers. Her hair, a long braid, twisted about her head. Finest person he knew of, and he caught his braid as he stepped forward and looked into her grey eyes. A can of talcum? What kind? Any kind, that's fine. She looked back at she looked back at him apparently without self-consciousness, and as the list melted away, his heart raced with it wildly. I am not old, he wanted to say. He wanted to say, at 50, I'm younger than most men of 40. Don't I interest you at all? But she only said, what kind of girl? And he answered, what can you recommend? That's fine. Almost painfully, he took his eyes from her, went out, and got into his cab. Okay, let's continue. Yes, we get here. If that young idiot only knew what an old imbecile like me could do for her. He thought humorously what words I could open out to her. As he drove away into the winter twilight, he followed this train of thought to a totally unprecedented conclusion. Perhaps the time of day was the responsible stimulant for the shop windows glowing into the cold, the tinkling bells of a delivery slave, the white glass left by shovels on the side walls, the enormous distance of the stars brought back to the feel of other nights 30 years ago. For an instant, the girls he had known then slipped like phantoms out of their dull matronly selves of today and fluttered past him with frosty, seductive laughter, and a pleasant shiver crawled up his spine. Youth, he apostrophed, he apostrophized with conscious lack of originality, and as a somewhat ruthless and domineering man of no morals whatsoever. He considered going back to the drugstore to seek the blonde girl's address. It was not his sort of thing, so the half-formed intention passed the idea mind. Youth, by heaven, youth, he repeated under his breath. I want it near me, all around me, just once more before I'm too old to care. He was tall, lean, and handsome, with the ruddy, bronzed face of a sportsman and a just faintly green mustache. Once he had been among the city's best views, organizer of cotillions and charity balls, popular with men and women, and with several generations of them. After the war, he had suddenly felt poor, gone into business, and in 10 years accumulated nearly $1 million. Tom Squares was not introspective, but he perceived now that the wheel of his life had revolved again, bringing up forgotten yet familiar dreams and yearnings entering his house. He turned suddenly to a pile of disregarded, disregarded invitations to see whether or not he had been bidden to a dance tonight, drove out his dinner, which he ate alone at the downtown club. His eyes were half closed, and on his face was a faint smile. He was practicing so that he would be able to laugh at himself painlessly, if necessary. I don't even know what they talk about, he admitted. They pit prominent broker goes to petting party with debutant. What is a petting party? Do they serve refreshments? Will I have to learn to play a saxophone? These methods, lately as remote as China in a newsreel, came alive to him. They were serious questions. At 10 o'clock he walked up the steps of the college club to a private dance with the same sense of entering a new world as when he had gone into a training camp back in 17. He spoke to a hostess of his generation, and to her laughter overwhelmingly of another, and sat down in a corner to acclimate himself. He was not alone long. A silly young man named Leland Jakes, who lived across the street from Tom, remarked him kindly and came over to Brighton his life. He was such an exceedingly fatuous young man that for a moment Tom was annoyed, but he perceived craftily that he might be of service. "Hello, Mr. Squares. How are you, sir?" "Fine, thanks." Leland quieted dance. As one man of the world with another, Mr. Jake sat or lay down on the couch and lit, or so it seemed to Tom, 3 or 4 cigarettes at once. "You should have been here last night, Mr. Squares." "Oh boy, that was a pretty and a half. That call counts 5:30. Who is that girl who changes partners every minute?" Tom asked. "No, the one in white passing the door. That's Annie Laurie." "Are there Laurie's daughter?" "Yes, she seems popular." "About the most popular girl in town anyway, at a dance. Not not popular except at dances." "Oh, sure, but she hangs around with Randy Campbell all the time." "What Campbell, baby?" There were new names in town in the last decade. "It's a boy and girl affair." Pleased with this phrase, Jake tried to repeat it. "One of those boy and girls affair, boys and girl affairs." He gave it up and ate several more cigarettes, crushing out the first series on Tom's lap. "Does she drink?" "Not especially. At least I never saw her passed out. That Randy Campbell just cut in on her now." They were a nice couple. Her beauty sparkled bright against his strong, tall form, and they floated hoveringly, delicately, like two people in a nice, amusing dream. They came near and Tom admired the faint dust of powder over her freshness, the guarded sweetness of her smile, the fragility of her body calculated by nature to a millimeter to suggest a bud, yet guarantee a flower. Her innocent, passionate eyes were brown, perhaps, but almost violet in the silver light. "Is she out this year?" "Whoa, Miss Laurie." "Yes." Okay, we arrived here. Let's continue after 1 minute. Although the girl's loveliness interested Tom, he was unable to picture himself as one of the attentive, grateful queen that pursued her round the room. Better meet her when the holidays were over and most of these young men were back in college, where they belonged. Tom Squires was old enough to wait. He waited a fortnight while the city sank leaned into the endless northern northern midwinter where gray skies were friendlier than metallic blue skies, and dusk whose lights were a reassuring glimpse into the continuity of human cheer, was warmer than the afternoons of cloudless sunshine. The coat of snow lost its praise and became soiled and shabby, and rats froze in the street. Some of the big houses on Christ Avenue began to close as their occupants went south. In those cold days, Tom asked Annie and her parents to go as his guests to the last bachelor's ball. The Lorries were an old family in Minneapolis, grown a little harassed and poor since the war. Mrs. Lorry, a contemporary of Tom's, was not surprised that his should send mother and daughter orchids and dine them luxuriously in his apartment on fresh caviar, kale, and champagne. Annie saw him only dimly. He liked vividness as the old do for the young, but she perceived his interest in her and performed for him the traditional ritual of young beauty smiles, polite, wide-eyed attention, a profile held obligingly in this light or in that. At the ball he danced with her twice, and though she was teased about it, so we get here. She was flattered that such a man of the world he had become, that instead of a mere old man had singled her out. She accepted his invitation to the symphony the following week with the idea that it would be unkind to refuse. There were several nice invitations like that. Sitting beside him, she dozed in the warm shadow of Brahms and thought of Randy Campbell and other romantic nebulosities who might appear tomorrow, feeling casually mellow. On one afternoon she deliberately provoked Tom to kiss her on the way home, but she wanted to laugh when he took her hands and told her fervently he was falling in love. But how could you? She protested, really you mustn't say such crazy things. Uh, but how could you? A few days later, her mother spoke to her as Tom waited outside in his car. Who is that, Annie? Mr. Squares. Shut the door a minute. You are seeing him quite a bit. Why not? Well, dear, he is 50 years old. But mother, there is hardly anybody else in town. But you mustn't get any silly idea about him. Don't worry. Actually, he bores me to extinction most of the time. She came to a sudden decision. I'm not going to see him anymore. I just couldn't get out of going with him this afternoon. And that night, as she stood by her door in the circle of Randy Campbell's arm, Tom and his single kiss had no existence for her. Oh, I do love you so, Randy whispered. Kiss me once more. Their cold cheeks and warm lips met in the crisp darkness, and watching the icy moon over his shoulder, Annie knew that she was his surly aunt pulling his face down, kissed him again, trembling with emotion. When will you marry me then? He whispered. When can you afford it? Could you announce our engagement if you knew the misery of having you out with somebody else and then making love to you? Oh, Randy, you ask so much. It's too awful to say good night. Can't I come in for a minute? Yes, sitting close together in a trance before the flickering, listening fire. They were oblivious that their common fate was being coolly waved by a man of 50 who lay in a hot bath some blocks away. So let's move on to chapter number 2 up after 2 minutes. So maybe let's continue. Tom Squares had guessed from Annie's extremely kind and detached manner of the afternoon that he had failed to interest her. He had promised himself that in such an eventuality he would drop the matter, but now he found himself in no such humor. He didn't want to marry her. He simply wanted to see her and be with her a little, and up to the moment of her sweetly casual, half passionate, yet wholly emotional kiss. Giving her up would have been easy, for her was past the romantic age, but sometimes the thought, the thought of her made his heart move up a few inches in his chest and beat there steady and fast. But this is the time to get out, he said to himself. My age, no possible right to force myself into her life. He rubbed himself dry, brushed his hair before the mirror, and as he lay down, the comb said decisively, "That is that." And after reading for an hour, he turned about the lamp with a snap and repeated aloud, "That is that." In other words, that was not that at all. And the click of material things don't finish of any lorry as a business decision might be settled by the tap of a pencil on the table. I'm going to carry this matter a little further, he said to himself about a half past hour. On that acknowledgment, he turned over and found sleep. In the morning, she had receded somewhat, but by 4 o'clock in the afternoon she was all around him. The phone was for calling her. A woman's footfalls pacing his office were her footfalls. The snow outside the window was blowing perhaps against her rosy face. There is always the little plan I thought of last night, he said to himself. In 10 years I'll be 60, and then no youth, no beauty for me ever anymore. In a sort of a panic, he took a sheet of note paper and composed a carefully phrased, phrased letter to Annie's mother, asking permission to pay court to her daughter. He took it himself into the hall, but before the letter slid, he tore it up and dropped the pieces in a cuspidor. I couldn't do such an underhand trick, he told himself, at my age, but this self-congratulation was premature, for he wrote the letter and mailed it before he left his office at night. Next day, the reply he had counted on arrived. He could have guessed its very words in advance. It was curt and indignant refusal. It ended, "I think it best that you and my daughter meet no more. Very sincerely yours, Mabel Tolman Lorry." And now Tom thought coolly, "We'll see what the girl says to that." He wrote a note to Annie. Her mother's letter had surprised him. It said, but perhaps it was best that they should meet no more, in view of her mother's attitude. By return, post came Annie's defiant answer to her mother fiat. This isn't the dark ages. I will see you whenever I like. She named a rendezvous for following afternoon. Her mother's short softness brought about what he had failed to achieve directly, for where Annie had been on the point of dropping him, he was now determined to do nothing of the sort, and the secrecy engendered by disapproval at home simply contributed to the missing excitement. As February wandered into deep, solemn, interminable winter, she met him frequently and on a new basis. Sometimes they drove over to Steeple to see a picture or to have dinner. Sometimes they parked far out on a boulevard in his copy, while the pillars lit glazed. The wind chilled to opacity and filled his lamps with ermine. Often he brought along something special to drink, enough to make her gay, but carefully, never more, for mingled with his other emotions about her was something paternally concerned. Laying his cards on the table, he told her that it was her mother who had unwittingly pushed her toward him, but Annie only laughed at his duplicity. She was having a better time with him than with anyone else, and never failing consideration. What if his eyes were tired, his cheeks a little leathery and veined, and his was masculine and strong. Moreover, his experience was a window looking upon a wider, richer world, and with Randy Campbell next day, she was Tom now, who was vaguely disconnected. He had there would be a mistake. His liberty pursues to him, and he could offer her only a dozen years before he would be old, but she had become something precious to him, and he perceived. One day they had ridden home from Estepole and dropped into the college club for tea, breaking to get him around it and stepping into his space. They smelled onions and whiskey. The door revolved again after them, and he was back within, facing them. It was Randy Campbell. He said, and I will just give you a tip, he continued. Your mother's inside. The jealous, ill temper of another generation reached Tom only faintly, like the protest of a child, but at this impertinent warning he bristled with annoyance. Came on with her glance and easily averted from Randy. Anyway, it was sparsely populated, trim, middle-aged women, fire momentarily Annie drew back. Then she walked toward them. Hello, Mother, Mrs. Trumbull, Aunt Caroline. The two later responded. Mrs. Trumbull even nodded faintly at Tom, but Annie's mother got to her feet without a word, her eyes frozen, her mouth drawn. For a moment she stood staring at her daughter. Then she turned abruptly and left the room. Tom and Annie found a table across the room. Wasn't the trash, wasn't breathing aloud? He didn't answer. For 3 days she hadn't spoken to me. Suddenly she broke out. Oh, people can be so small. I was going to sing the leading part in the junior league. Why not? Because a representative junior league girl mustn't defy her mother. Ask if I were a naughty child. Tom stared on at a row of cups on the mantelpiece. Two or three of them bore his name. Perhaps she was right, she said suddenly. When I begin to do harm to you, it's time to stop. What do you mean? At her shocked voice, his heart poured. A warm liquid poured into his body. Oh, well, I'm going tomorrow. There was an argument, but he had made up his mind. At the station next evening, she wept and clung to him. Thank you for the happiest month I have had in years, he said. But you will come back, Tom. I will be 2 months in Mexico. Then I am going east for a few weeks. He tried to sound fortunate, but the frozen city he was leaving seemed to be in blossom. Her frozen bride was a flower on the air, and his heart sank as he realized that some young man was waiting outside to take her home in a car hung with blooms. Goodbye, Annie, goodbye, sweet. 2 days later, he spent the morning in Houston with Hal Mix, a classmate at Yale. You are in luck for such an old fella, said Mix at lunch, because I'm going to introduce you to the cutest little traveling companion you ever saw, who is going all the way to Mexico City. The lady in question was frankly pleased to learn at the station that she was not returning alone. She and Tom dined together on the train and later played Rummy for an hour. But when, at 10 o'clock, standing in the door of the stateroom, she turned back to him suddenly with a certain look, frank and unmistakable, and stood there holding that look for a long moment. Tom Squares was suddenly in the grip of an emotion that was not the one in question. He wanted desperately to see Annie, call her for a second on the phone, and then fall asleep, knowing she was young and pure as a star, and safe in bed. Good night, he said, trying to keep any repulsion out of his voice. Oh, good night. Arriving in El Paso next day, he drove over the border to Juarez. It was bright and hot, and after leaving his bunks at the station, he went into a bar for a nice drink. As he sipped, it, a girl's voice addressed him thickly from the table behind. "You're American." He had noticed He had noticed her slanted forward on her elbows as he came in. Now, turning, he faced a young girl about 17, obviously drunk, yet with gentility in her and still do about her. He said she came in about 3 o'clock with two young fellows, one of them her sweetie. They had a fight, and the man went off, and this one's been her ever since. A spasm of distaste passed over Tom. The rules of his generation were outraged and defeated. That an American girl shouldn't be drunk and deserted in a tough foreign town, that such things happen, might happen to any. He looked at his watch, he hesitated. As she got up, asked, she owns for 5 gens. But suppose her boyfriends come back, tell them she's at the Roosevelt Hotel in El Paso. Approaching, he put his hand on her shoulder. She looked up. "You look like Santa Claus," she said vaguely. "You couldn't possibly be Santa Claus. Call you? I'm going to take you to El Paso." "Well," she considered, "you look perfectly safe to me." She was so young and drenched. Little Rose, he could have wept for her wretched unconsciousness of the old facts, the old penal night, having explained things. "A telegraph office. Have given up Mexican trip," he wired, "leaving here tonight. Please meet train in the Astipol station at 3 o'clock and ride with me to Minneapolis. Sally, mother of hers." On the train, as the baked tropical lands and green fields fell away, and the north swept near again with patches of snow, then fields of it, fierce winds in the vestibule, and bleak, hibernating farms. He paced the corridors with intolerable restlessness when they drew in to shake the wind, and searched the platform eagerly, but his eyes failed to find her. He had counted on those few minutes between the cities. They had become a symbol of her fidelity to their friendship, and as the train started again, he searched it desperately from smoker to observation car. But he couldn't find her, and now he knew that he was meant for her. At the thought that she had taken his advice and plunged into affairs with another man, he grew weak with fear. Drawing into my Napoli, his hands fumbled so that he must call the porter to fasten his baggage. Then there was an interminable wait in the corridor while the baggage was taken off and he was pressed up against a girl in a squirrel trimmed coat. Tom, well, I will be. Her arms went up around his neck. But Tom, she cried, I have been right here in this car since Istanbul. His cane fell in the corridor. He drew her very tenderly close, and their lips met like let's continue right now, not after 2 or 1 or 3 or 5 minutes. Let's start now. So, chapter 3. The new intimacy of their definite engagement brought Tom a feeling of young happiness. He awoke on winter mornings with the sense of undeserved joy hovering in the room. Meeting young men, he found himself matching the vigor of his mind and body against theirs. Suddenly his life had a purpose and a background. He felt rounded and complete. On grey March afternoons, when she wandered familiarly in his apartment, the warm sureties of his youth flooded back. Ecstasy and poignancy, the mortal and the eternal posed in their immemorially tragic juxtaposition, and a little astounded, he found himself relishing than a younger lover, and to Annie he seemed to know everything, to stand holding open the gates for her passage into the truly golden world. We will go to Europe first, he said. Oh, we'll go there a lot. Will not we? Let's wait mine apple. Oh no, he was a little shocked. My dear, it's all right. Mr. Lorry yielded at length to the inevitable. With ill grace, she acknowledged the engagement, asking only that marriage shouldn't take place until fall. Such a long time, Annie sighed. After all, I'm your mother. It's so little to ask. It was a long winter, even in a land of long winters. March was it seemed at last as though the cold must be defeated. There was a series of blizzards, desperate as last chance. The people waited. Their first energy to resist was spent, and men like Wheeler simply hung on. There was less to do now, and the general restlessness was expressed by surliness in daily contacts. Then early in April, with a long sigh, the ice cracked, the snow ran into the ground, and the green Ager spring broke up, drove. One day, but this time Tom slowly stopped the car and put his arm around her. Why do you cry like that? Are you unhappy? Oh, no, no, she protested. But you cried yesterday the same way, and you wouldn't tell me why. You must always tell me. Nothing except the spring. It smells so good, and it always has so many thoughts and memorizes in it. It's it's our spring, my sweetheart, he said. Annie, don't let's wait. Let's be married in June. I promised mother, but if you like, we can announce our engagement in June. The spring came fast now. The sidewalks were damp, then dry, and the children roller skated on them, and boys played baseball in the soft, vacant lots. Tom got up elaborate picnics of Annie's on a lovely May evening. Tom came up the lowest walk and sat down beside Annie's mother on the porch. It's so pleasant, he said. I loved Annie and I will walk instead of driving this evening. I want to show her the funny old house I was born in it. On Chambers Street, wasn't it? Annie will be home in a few minutes. She went riding with some young people after dinner. Is on Chambers Street. He looked at his watch, presently hoping Annie would come while it was still light enough to see quarter of 9. He frowned. An hour yesterday afternoon. If I was 21, he said to himself, I'll just make scenes and we had both be miserable. He and Mrs. Lorry talked the warmth of the night, precipitated the vague evening lassitude of the 50s and were softened them both. Much or hypocrite drew away his second. I hope there is nothing wrong, said Tom anxiously. Who is she with? There were four when they started out. Randy Campbell and another couple I didn't notice who. They were only going for a soda. I hope there hasn't been any nowadays. She kept herself from eating. You will get used to it. Her husband excused himself and went up to bed, and the conversation became more forced and desultory when the church clock over the way struck 11. They both broke off and listened to the beats. 20 minutes later, just as Tom impatiently crashed out his last cigar, an automobile drifted down the street and came to Annie. The car snorted away. "Oh, hello," she cried. "I'm so sorry. What time is it? I'm I terribly late." Tom didn't answer. The straight lamp drew wine color upon her face and expressed with a shadow he, the hastened flush of her cheek. Her dress was crushed, her hair was in brief expressive disarray, but it was the strange little break in her voice that made him afraid to speak, made him turn his eyes aside. "What happened?" Mrs. Lorry asked casually. Casually. "Oh, a blow out and something wrong with the engine, and we lost our way." Is it in her hand? Her breast rising and falling a little, her eyes wide and bright. Tom realized it with a shock. Wouldn't separate himself from Mrs. Lorry. When she excused herself, he repressed a frantic tendency to say, "But why should you go now, after sitting here?" And he had never been so conscious of her beauty. Her damp hands were touched with dew. "You were out with young Campbell," he said. "Yes, don't be mad. I feel so upset tonight." "Upset?" She sat down, whimpering a little. "I couldn't help it. Please don't be mad." He wanted so for me to take a ride with him, and it was such a wonderful night. So I went just for an hour, and we began talking, and I didn't realize the time. I felt so sorry for him. How do you think I felt? He scarred himself, but it was said now. "Don't, Tom, I told you I was terribly upset. I want to go to bed. I understand. Good night, Annie." "Oh, please don't act that way, Tom. Can't you understand?" But he could, and that was just the trouble. With the courteous bow of another generation, he walked down the steps and off into the obliterating moonlight. In a moment he was just a shadow passing the street lamps, and then a faint footfall up the street. So here we go. I think that's enough. I'll see you in the last, but I think it's just this is the last chapter, chapter number 4. Let's read it and finish this live. Okay, so all drove that summer naked to stand for a minute in front of the house where he was born, and then in front of another house where he had been a little boy on his customary roads. There were other sharp landmarks of the 19th converted habitats of gaieties that no longer existed: livery stables and the old Noshka ring, where every winter his father had curled on the well-kept ice. And it's a darn pity, he would mutter, a darn pity. He had a tendency to walk past the lights of a certain drugstore because it seemed to him that it had contained the seed of another and nearer branch of the past. Once he went in, and inquiring casually about the blonde clerk found that she had married and departed several months before he obtained her name and on an impulse sent her a wedding present from a dumb admirer, for he felt he always lost the battle against youth and spring, and with his grave paid the penalty for ages and forgivable sin, refusing to die, but he couldn't have walked down wasted into the darkness without being used up only to break his old heart, conflict itself as a value beyond victory and defeat, and those 3 months he had them forever. So we finished this story. It was so fun. So have a good day and see you in the next video. Bye.